microphone turn on? Yes, good morning, Mowbray. Good morning, everybody. My name's Rod Jarman. I'm the Director of the London Policing College, and it's my great pleasure this morning to just make the connection between this exciting workshop and the other workshops that we've run so far as part of our 4th International Police Education Conference. Our focus this year has been about renewing confidence in public protection, which has been a big issue in the United Kingdom, but what we found over the last year is a big issue in many police forces around the world and in many countries. We've particularly been looking at violence against women and girls and rape and serious sexual offences, but also about the growing issues of fraud and cybercrime, where in the UK 55% of crime now is fraud, and also looking at the new demonstration and public disorder models. And we're trying to look to see what are the changes that are happening in each of those areas and how those could be integrated to help general policing renew confidence and improve public protection. The context from this was from a report by the Police Foundation, which is a think tank in the United Kingdom, and it came up with issues around policing. A really senior group of people looked at the policing over many months and came up with the issues that trust and confidence in policing has dropped massively. There are significant issues around police officer burnout and well-being. Some of it's about COVID, but much of it's about workloads. There are a number of performance challenges, and we've had a number of ethical issues sort of come to the light. Many of them are very old, but obviously when the reviews and reports come out, they all crunch together and suggest there's a real problem with policing. So we came up with this year's conference aims to look at the capability of police services, but not to look at the big what could we do that would cost a fortune, but to look at what is already known that could be implemented quickly and fundamentally improve performance in protective services and deal with the 5 core issues which we keep on coming back to. So far, we've run 3 workshops in the United Kingdom, a workshop in India on fraud and cybercrime, a workshop by IBZ Gimborne on the new public protests, and we have these 2 final workshops which will bring together the international perspectives on violence against women and girls, and it's a very important area that we're really looking forward to hearing about. We've done quite a lot of research and analysis of what's come out of the workshops so far, and we have some emerging themes around how workload might be thought about differently, how police performance measures are actually affecting the ability of police services to respond to the issues of public protection. And we'll take all of those suggestions to our September conference, which is running between the 13th and 15th of September. There'll be some in-person part of the conference, but the main part will be open online, and I hope you will be able to join us there. And our intention is to make some recommendations which we can look at working with police forces through into 2023 to see if there are some potential changes that could be for benefit. So today I'm going to hand over to May-Britt now, and thank you very much, May-Britt, for your continued support with all this work and the International Police Association's support as well. And we're really looking forward to hearing from everyone today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. And very welcome to everyone online, and very welcome to our moderator and our speakers. I'm very happy to bring together these 2 workshops, one today and the second one on Wednesday, the 31st of August. We will be looking at different kind of programs that is delivered by the police in different countries, but also from NGOs, and we will look at research that is connected to violence against women and girls. So this, I'm sure, will be 2 really interesting workshops. My name is May-Britt Rinaldo Ronnebro, the International Police Association. I'm the Secretary General at the International Board, and this is a cooperation between the IPA, the abbreviation for International Police Association, and IBZ Gimborne, which is an international education center in Germany that collect police officers and police staff and others that are interested in police topics from the full globe and do training with them. So I'm particularly happy to say welcome to our moderator for the 2 workshops, Mrs. Ulrike Neuhoff from IBZ Gimborn. And I hand over to you, Ulrike, and looking forward to this 2 hours ahead of us. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, May-Britt, for your introduction. Welcome everybody to the first part of the workshop on violence against women and girls, where experts from all around the world will talk about the subject and thus provide a broad perspective. As May-Britt said, my name is Ulrike Neuhoff and I'm working at IBZ Castle Gimborn, the Training and Education Center of the International Police Association. We are located in Germany and run more than 50 seminars over the year. The seminars all deal with police-related subjects. And violence against women is a subject that is recurring in police training and education. And I'm sure that sadly the issue will remain with us for further years. Survey results show that only in the EU, 1 in 3 women has experienced physical and/or sexual violence since the age of 15. Every second woman has been confronted with sexual harassment. Globally, during the COVID-19 pandemic, violence against women and girls has increased. Whilst the first workshop on the matter in July focused on the situation in UK, looking at what should be prioritized in policing when it comes to violence against women and girls, this workshop looks at the problem from different angles, from international angles. We'll hear about actions taken to protect victims, to help victims to get out of their situation. Well, worldwide, every second woman has been confronted with sexual harassment. And one of the most worrying findings in the matter is that less than 40% of the assaulted women and girls seek for help, and only very few turn to the police. Whilst the first workshop looked at the situation in the UK, as I said, we hear about action plans in different countries, learn about how to address the most vulnerable females, how to be aware and take into account cultural factors. The workshop discusses ways for the police to create a basis of trust and how police in general is responding to violence against women and girls in other parts of the world. So today we're going to welcome experts from Sweden, Norway, and Australia. Before I welcome our first speaker for today, I'd like to encourage you to use the chat bar to put your questions there, and we try to, I will forward them to the experts, and we will collect them, and if possible, they're going to be answered at the end of the talk. But if we don't manage to answer them all, they all will be considered and will be collected on the LPC website, and in the evaluation of the workshop, your input will be appreciated and will be worked with. So please, I really would like to encourage you to get involved, use the chat bar, and if you want to share any best practice examples from your experience, we are really happy to learn about that and to share that with others. Our first speaker is May-Britt Ronnebro from Sweden. You already heard her speaking, and she's said that she has many roles, holds many positions. May-Britt has been a police officer with the Swedish National Police for 46 years, I think. She's got a master's degree in applied criminology from Cambridge, and she's an expert in crime prevention, having developed the Swedish Crime Harm Index. May-Britt is now lecturing at the Linnaeus University in Växjö, Sweden, where she teaches crime prevention. She mentioned that she is the General Secretary of the International Executive Board of the IPA. And she's got an incredible police network around the world. And she is the one who actually got all the experts together for the workshop today and the workshop on Wednesday. She will talk about global data on violence against women and girls and introduce the implementation of an American concept in Sweden. So May-Britt, thank you very much for everything you've done for this workshops, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ulrike. Well, may I ask you, Kim, to close down your camera so everyone just can follow one presentation, one speaker? Thank you. Well, I will just open my PowerPoint. Hopefully that will turn up now. No.
That's fine, May-Britt, we can see that.
Good, thank you. So today we will look at something that is called the way out. It's an American model that was implemented in Sweden, and I will particularly focus on 2 counties in Sweden where we have worked with it for quite a long while. I speak on behalf of this workshop, but also behalf of all the women and people that are affected by domestic violence. So I try to bring something to this workshop that might be a possibility for other countries, other areas of my own country as well, but worldwide, a program that's been working for rather a long time, and we know that it's successful. So we start to look at an American model of it, and it's just that I got a totally different screen compared to what you got. Hopefully, I just need to see where I'm ending up. So, oops, this is no good. Sorry. It was invented in Duluth in Minnesota, USA, and from the very beginning, this was something that the social welfare workers in this area found that they had to find a way how to stop violence, particularly domestic violence. It's an intervention project, and sometimes it's called the DIPE or the PENS model. It was designed in 1981, and it took a few years before it was worldwide known or went to be known in the English-speaking countries around the world. In USA, it was a 28-week program. This had been changed through the years, and some other countries have done their own versions, and this is what we are now going to look at. I'm sorry, but I need to see if I can get the correct. Now is she? No, that was strange. Yeah, I need to do like this instead. Sorry, because I can't see the screen. So I can't see my own screen. Something went wrong with the connections between it. So yeah, the program in Sweden is based on Per Isedal. He's a Norwegian writer. He's also a psychologist, and he do psychotherapy as well. And he decided to start to work with men in Norway and try to make a definition onto what is actually violence. And this went to be that he could identify that it's something that someone else do to another person, act injuries, hurt, frighten, or offend. And that this is something that the other person is not referring to, that is something good is going on for he or she. I'm sorry, Karen, but my computer is absolutely weird because now I can't even change my presentation.
Okay. Do you want to?
Yeah, you need to click it up because
Yeah.
everything is now frozen and very strange. So I can't see anything now.
Okay, let me see if I try and share your presentation, let me see if you can see that.
Yeah, because everything went totally away from whatever it could be. I stopped sharing just to be sure about that there's nothing else. It's on the screen.
Okay, can you see my screen?
I can only see the screen with all the people's name.
Okay, can anybody else see Maj-Britt's presentation on their screen?
No, I see the same as Maj-Britt.
Yeah.
Francis, we may need your...
This is very weird.
Just trying to do the same, but bear with me.
Can you now see my screen?
No.
No.
I can just see the circles of people. Hang on. Yeah, can see your screen now, Maj-Britt.
Yeah, we try and see if there is. It's just that when I click, it doesn't move. And then everything is just. That's very weird. I never had something like this. Now? Did you get the change now? Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh. Well, we were talking about violence. I'm so sorry about this. Well, when we look at violence, we know very well that this occurs regardless of gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and economic status, and so on. This is as we heard earlier from Ulrike, it's very common among women to experience violence in their relationship. We can also see that this is something that is not only that you are hit or kicked, it's insults, it's threats, and it's control. And control is one of those things that you will need to be very aware of. Many times when this violence and the control is de-escalating, as you believe as the person that is facing it, it could end up with rape. It's a situation where this person tried to make you feel comfortable back, and then they take out this in a sexual way. So this is unwanted sexual acts that they might be facing as well. When we look at utväg, the way out, this concept that was brought from USA to Sweden, we can see that this is a collaboration between a lot of different authorities. It's a health and medical services. We can see that is involved the police. It's the local police that is involved into it, and they are the ones that normally are the first one to meet the perpetrator and also sometimes the victim. It could be that the victim is already brought to the health service and looked after by the hospital. This is also something that is dealt with by the criminal justice system, so the prosecutors service is involved into it as the prison service is dealing with it. Basically, it built on the municipalities' social service, so they are those that deliver it, but it's connected within the county that is normally quite a large number of municipalities, like the county of Skaraborg. 15 of the municipalities has signed in, and in Södra Älvsborg, the county south from Skaraborg, there is 10 municipalities then signed in to the program. We can see that they also collaborate with different women shelters, victim shelters, and also other kind of NGOs. So it's a joint thing for many different agencies and authorities coming together. And the success is that these people are working in one team. The Way Out started as from the very beginning as a project that is now implemented as a regular program, working to stop this partner violence, and it should be stopped completely. It's based on the commitment and to prevent for everyone, and also to reduce that it might happen, but it's basically to eliminate violence in the relationship. They reach out to all parties involved. So if there is a victim and a perpetrator, you start to talk with them, and you might identify that these people got children. It could be joint children, or one of the two got children in this relationship. And all these persons are involved into the program. They are also focusing on the LGBT to be inclusive into the activities, because violence is among all different kind of relationships. The pictures you see in my presentations are all from the venues in Skövde in the Skaraborg County, how it looks when you come in and work into their facilities. It's support. The form is a support for individual counseling. That is how you start. It might be 1, 2, or 3 meetings with a professional, and then you will be identified as victim of violence, the person who perpetrate or have perpetrated, or you might be a child or a young person that live in this household and being either witness, seeing this or listening to it, or you might even be included into the violence. All these 3 categories are invited into it. What's interesting with the Way Out is that included into the program is that the staff of the Way Out also educate people that would join into conferences, educational conferences, or training programs, and they do a lot of training for the collaborating authorities. So it might be a full day training for police officers, as the police officers would be the one that invite you to be transferred to the program when you are sitting there in front of them in an interrogation, giving your evidence, or you're interrogated because you are a suspect of the crime, and you will get an offer including into not only what the police do but also this. So they need to know very well what they tell and why they invite you into it. How can you come in contact with them? Well, the most common way is that you call their office. You need to go into their website, or you use the 1177 number that is for the healthcare, and they will connect you through the switchboard to the person at the center. You can also speak with an official officer, like at the police, at the social welfare, or you meet a nurse at the hospital, and they will refer you to this program. They will support you. They avoid email contact, and this is just because they would like to be very confidential with what's. Now my presentation is gone again. Oh my goodness, this is really confusing. You still see it, Karen? Because it just went away.
There is I can see a sort of background slide.
Yeah, I don't touch it now, I just go through it. We will look at the victims to begin with. Normally women, but there are also men that might be, or same sex relationships that are one is the victim, and then you try to identify them. When it comes to this, it will be first 1, 2, or 3, as I said, talks, chats with them to identify what their needs are, and they will also be referred to other kind of support that might be needed at the time. They might need protection, so that they need to speak with a prosecutor, or it might need that it need healthcare, and they will be supported in this. Later on, they will be invited into group sessions, and there is a trained group leader that will go through different type of discussions, and they will meet other persons that are victims that are at different stage in the treatment. This is also a way of healing together and also exchanging things together. And everything is voluntary and very confidential. So you don't need to have any fear coming to the location. The perpetrator is basically from the very beginning treated as an individual. This might be the way it will be all through the treatment. But if you are a perpetrator that are identified to be one that could be in a group session, you will also do the same as the victim, but you will have your own, what we would call a perpetrator of violence group, or if you are a parent, it will be a perpetrator parent group with children that you will receive a treatment. Same confidentiality, and it's free to join it. Some people can get this as a fine, like a sentence from the judge, as the prosecutor might identify you to be one that would be, then you need to be there, and you need to report back that you actually took part in the training, the number of sessions that is set to you. The minimum is normally 12 times, and it could be up to 18, depending on your individual needs. Children and young persons are divided into different age groups. So the group that you will come to after having your own little chat with the trained person at the center, you will put into a group like 5, 6, 7 years old, or 7, 8, 9 years old, or a teenager group, depending on where you belong at the time. And it's really one of the really healing things when you see children coming in and how they understand through meeting other children that they are not alone facing this kind of thing with the parents or their mother together with a new stepfather or different kind of situation that they have been through. And they will be able to, by drawing, by talking, by play, share their emotions and their story. There is a goal set by the UN, and it's to have zero violence against children by 2030. It's 8 years left, and there's a lot of work to do. So the world needs really to open their eyes and see what's ongoing. And we know what happened during the pandemic. It was an increase of reported domestic violence, and you can also estimate there were more children facing this. So we really need to come together and start to work with this. Otherwise, there will be no chance. I did a research myself on this program when it was still young. It started 1996 in the municipality where I was working as a police officer, and already in 1998 I looked at it the first time, and I spoke with the perpetrators, and these men that I met at that time have all survived without violence after the treatment. So it is a successful program, and this is the success that is still ongoing. But it's few men that choose to go there voluntary. It's more that you need to persuade them. So it's a good way to try to inform them in a positive way, not only to accuse them of what bad they done. Women are easier to bring to it, and women mothers normally bring their children. If you would like to read more about it, there is slides on my PowerPoint with all the documentation background and also further readings. And additional, there will be the helpline for children, the helpline for men and women. that you can have a look at, and what is now ongoing in the Swedish schools, where we try to teach children about how to treat each other equal. I think I stop there, Ulrike, and I hand over to you, because this went to be a total little mess about my presentation. I'm sorry about that. I do hope you understood the value of having so many collaborating together and deliver a treatment program like the Way Out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maj-Britt. There is one question in the chat bar from Francis, and she would like to know about the general background of the UTVEC counselors. Can you say something about that?
Most of them are social welfare workers. There is a socionom in Swedish. They do train it as basically no shorter than 3 years, and they normally have worked in the social welfare at the municipality. And after that, they do special training, like therapist training, and then they move into this. And then they do the training and they need to go through. Some of them done a program that it takes 7 years before they are fully qualified. So it's not just something that you jump into. You got a good experience background, and you got a good training at the university.
Thank you, Maj-Britt. So thank you for the talk. I'm sorry for the little disaster with your presentation. It's always very stressful. I can tell that from own bitter experience. I would like now to introduce Susanne Gosenius from Sweden as well. Susanne started working in the Swedish police in 2007. And Susanne, I understand you're a coordinator at the Victim Protection Unit in the south of Sweden. You've worked as a lawyer, you've worked as a barrister, so you've done law. You have done probably also counseling, and you are going to talk about a proactive measure that's geared towards perpetrators, the risk reduction intervention. Susanne, we're very curious to learn about the method. From what I understood, it is a rather successful tool and could be an inspiration for many who are working in fighting violence against women and girls. The floor is yours. Thank you, Susanne.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And first of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me and for arranging this very interesting and important workshop. Let me just check if I can share my presentation before I start, and I hope I won't get the same problems as you had, Maj-Britt.
That's fine, Susanne, we can see that.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Well, as Ulrike already said, I started it within the police in 2007, and I worked previously as a criminal lawyer and a barrister. So I'm not a police officer. I don't work at the field, and I work on a strategic level. And I work in the Swedish police at the Witness Protection Unit in Region South. And the work with victims of crimes is an area of particular attention and priority in Sweden. And in just those 15 years I worked with these matters, there has been major changes in Sweden. And our toolbox with measures for victims has also developed a lot in these years. And my unit work with support and protection of victims, also acting as witnesses. And the main goal with our work is to ensure their safety and well-being during the entire legal process in which they are partaking. And it's not unusual that victims are unwilling to assist in the legal process, but with good support and protection, we can guide and motivate them throughout. So our work is a matter of rehabilitation, avoiding future crimes, but also taking good care of our best evidence. The better support, help and protection they receive, the more involved they are in the whole legal process. So I will spend the next coming 20 minutes talk about risk reduction intervention, the background, the method, the types of cases we work with, benefits and risk, conversation methodology, judicial question, and I will end with some statistics and results from Region South from the first year of the project. The support and protection measures that we offer are often defensive measures aimed to the protected person, the victim. And often these can be measures that includes major restrictions into their life, such as relocation, sheltered housing, and protected identity. Risk reduction intervention is a proactive measures geared toward the perpetrators. And as I said, we tested the method in Region South since 2019, and it has proven very successful. And now this is a national method within the Swedish police, and the implementation work is now ongoing. Risk reduction intervention, RRI, is a method based on specially trained personnel within the police negotiation unit. And this unit will contact perpetrators and have an impactful conversation with them. And this occurs after that the victim protection unit has identified appropriate cases and made a risk assessment. The negotiators are specially trained in conversation methods, and they also have great experience in crisis management, such as hostage situation and suicide threats. And RRI is based on communication that pushes the person's trigger points, which can allow the individual to by themselves conclude that stopping of the violence is to their own best interest. And the challenge for the negotiators is to get the perpetrator to change patterns and realize the benefit of dealing with his situation in a different, non-criminal way. And this is a purely preventative method, and it does not affect the ongoing investigation of the crime committed. The perpetrators will be charged for the crime they already committed. And the results from Region South shows that it is possible to pursue perpetrators to refrain criminal acts. And this means that victims may not need as far-reaching protective measures. It means reduced suffering for them, but also less investigative burden for the police, as fewer crimes are committed. And this method is just one of many tools we have in the victim protection unit, and we often combine it together with other support and protection measures. Current cases for RRI are initiated and received via the victim protection process. Specially trained negotiators are contacted before the intervention, but first efforts must be preceded by a well-performed risk assessment, information gathering, and mapping of the perpetrator. And this is something that the victim protection unit is specialized in. So the method is based on each group's particular expertise, and therefore this is a unique collaboration between two different units, but participation of both units is necessary. The conversation methodology can be compared to the one we use for suicidal persons. Negotiators use certain keys and hooks to pursue the person to think in new patterns, and similar conversation methodology is used with perpetrators. So it's not about teaching the perpetrator to empathize with the victim, but it's rather trying to reach them by finding what gain the person in question can achieve by ending the crime. What's in it for me? It's very important that the method is performed by those who have training in talking to people in crisis. For an example, if you have someone standing on the rooftop and wanted to commit suicide and jump, you don't send any policeman up to the rooftop to talk to that person. You send someone who is specialized in talking with people in crisis. Do you dare to send someone else? And RRI is based on the same thought and the same conversation methodology to make the person to think in new patterns. It's not a matter of threatening sanctions if the perpetrator do not stop committing crimes. It's not about teaching the perpetrator empathy. It's rather helping them to find new solutions of their problems. And many of the perpetrators, they have never been in contact with a police officer before who has not charged them. And this can make them open up and receptive to the message. And of course, we also refer the perpetrators to special perpetrator programs, but they may become relevant on a later stage. And these programs also only work under the right circumstances. The perpetrator needs to be motivated. So first comes prevention, and then comes cure. Up. Here you can see the type of the cases we work with, and the method has shown greatest success in cases with domestic violence and victims of crime targeted because of their profession. And this is especially law enforcement personnel, but also other government staff, social workers, etc. We can see positive action. It's positive action for the affected person who can avoid the long-term suffering. It's crime prevention, it's resource savings, and another very important benefit is that by using the same units in the same organization, we don't have to consider, we don't have problems with information sharing. We don't have to deal with confidentiality rules. It's also positive for the victim because we can avoid measures that includes major restrictions into the affected person's life. And there are many benefits to the method, but also risks, as the intervention can cause the opposite effect. We don't want to trigger something that we did not think about, and we must be aware of that there can be a risk of increased violence. And this is why the risk assessment and the information gathering is so important. At the slightest suspicion of increased risk, we cancel the intervention. And as I already said, RRI has shown the best effects in domestic violence, but it's also where the risk that the intervention may trigger something that we did not expect it exist. In cases with domestic violence, we can come across easily offended and grandiose men who may commit homicide. It is unlikely, but still a fatal consequence that we must consider before an intervention. There are also risks that the future legal proceedings will be negatively affected. It's important that those who will operate under the method are well trained in the legal aspects. It is important that they have good knowledge in the difference between voluntary conversation and interrogation. So we avoid situations that gives rise to misunderstandings. For example, if the perpetrator needs an interpreter, we avoid police environment as much as possible. Holding a conversation in a police environment can involve the risk that the perpetrator misunderstands the purpose of RRI. The negotiator needs to avoid topics of conversation that relate to the ongoing police investigation as far as possible. And we avoid conversation with perpetrator with too extensive psychiatric diagnostics, or if they are just too mentally unstable. We do not perform RRI with minors. They have strong legal rights and they have a right to have a parent or a social worker present. We do not conduct intervention if the risk of violence is considered to be too high, or if we have too little information about the perpetrator, or if the case is too complex. We simply avoid all circumstances that may be a source of misunderstanding of the purpose of the intervention. And as I already said, the participation of both units is necessary. Victim protection unit, negotiation team, because the method is based on each unit's particular expertise. Victim protection units they are specialized in making risk assessment. Negotiation team They are specialized in talking with people in crisis. So the Victim Protection Unit, they identify relevant cases, they make a risk assessment, they collect information about the perpetrator. Then the negotiation unit perform the intervention and report back to the Victim Protection Unit, who continue working with the case. The negotiators, they use many different techniques, and one of them is active listening. Active listening technique is about maintaining an open approach. Active listening and patient results in the perpetrating feeling he is respected and that his concerns are being heard and addressed. It's about getting them to think in other ways and by listening. And all people have a fundamental need to be seen, heard, and confirmed. This conversation methodology requires education and training, and not everyone can handle this. Learning practical skills it's not easy, and like any other skills, one must sincerely understand the do's and don'ts of listening and act accordingly to become a better listener. And the goal for the negotiation technique is to work with the person in crisis toward a solution that previously seemed impossible. Different perpetrators, they have different interests in stopping committing crimes. Therefore, different keys needs to be used for different perpetrators, and this presupposes good preparation and information gathering. It's also an advantage if you can adapt the choice of negotiator to the nature of the case, because sometimes it fits with a woman, sometimes with a man, and sometimes certain physical looks and attribute may fit better than others. So the choice of negotiator is important, and factors that can be of importance to consider are the perpetrator's background, religion, culture background, social status, etc. They all have different reasons for eliminating their criminal behavior. So therefore it's important, very important, to do a proper background check on them so that the negotiator can use the right keys in order to reach them. Up. Regarding RRI, it's also important that the negotiators are trained in the legal issues that may be relevant. It is important to have good knowledge of the difference between conversation and interrogation. If it's considered an interrogation, the perpetrator has certain rights, including a defense lawyer being present. And the difference between conversation and interrogation can be thin in some countries. If this is not done correctly, it can be used negatively in a future trial. The suspect has legal rights that we must be aware of. And if the conversation is transferred to an interrogation, we cancel the intervention. Or we can tell the perpetrator that we cannot talk about things that belongs to the investigation. And if you still want to do that, we have to make a police report or contact the investigators. It's also very important to obtain consent. We need to inform that the conversation is voluntary and that it will not be included in the police investigation. So now I will show you some numbers and results from the first year of the project in Region South. In 2019, when we started this project, 80 cases were initiated in the southern region as relevant for RRI. Of these 80 cases, 54 interventions were carried out in 49 cases, and crime stopped or decreased in 35 cases out of 49. In 9 cases, the intervention was cancelled and no actions would be taken, and the reason for this are different, and I will come back to this. Here you can see the results of the interventions. In 31 cases, the crime stopped totally. In 4 cases, the crime decreased. In 2 cases out of 49, the situation was unchanged. In 3 cases, we could see that the perpetrator still showed some interest in the victim, but there was no crimes committed, no police report. In 7 cases, we could see that the crime stopped initially, but then continued again. And the reason for this could be upcoming custody dispute. We also looked at the relationship between the perpetrator and the victim, and here you can see that the majority of our cases were partner or former partners. And well, the majority of our cases was in domestic violence, but also quite a number of victims that was exposed because of their profession. And the majority of these were law enforcement personnel and social workers. The reason to cancel an operation can be that we have too little information about the perpetrator, the risk may increase, or the perpetrator maybe do not speak Swedish well enough. We avoid conversation with perpetrators with too extensive psychiatric diagnostics, or if they are too mentally unstable, when they can't receive the message from us. Also, we cancel operation if we have too little information or if the case is too complex. It's also important to collect information about how many police reports there have been made between the victim and the perpetrator. And here you can see that in several of our cases, there have been 1 to 10 reported crimes between the victim and the perpetrator. But in many cases, there have been 30 to 50 and even more reported crimes. So it's not difficult to understand what relief it is for a victim when a crime suddenly stops after an intervention. And it's also a great relief for the investigation officers that get fewer crimes to investigate. And here you can see what kind of crimes we work with. The majority of our cases deals with harassment, threats, violation of restraint orders, and perhaps not to be considered particular serious crimes, but it is the continuity of the crimes that makes it serious and stressful for the victim. However, we had a couple of cases with serious crimes such as attempted murder, kidnapping, rape, and other sexual abuses. And this was my last picture. So thank you for your attention and for listening.
Thank you, Susanne. That was very, very interesting. And I can see in the chat that some from our participants are quite impressed. Neil Golding wants to know whether those who are speaking to the perpetrators are trained police officers or do they come from other public services?
No, we just use the negotiation team within the police organization. And by using our same unit and the same organization, we don't have to deal with problems sharing information and confidentiality rules. And also these negotiators used in RRI, they are specially trained for the method. We have many negotiators and some of them are specialized in hostage situation. Others are good in talking with suicidal people and some of them fits for this method. So they are specially trained for the method. And likewise, the victim protection unit, they are trained in what information the negotiator needs when they collect information about the perpetrator.
I've just found the balance between the negotiating team and the other team very, very interesting and obviously very important that you have these two very different units who focus on different things. So I thought this was very interesting. Francis wants to know whether the methodology is being shared with other countries' law enforcement units, or is this just kept to the south of Sweden?
Well, I'm here talking to all of you, so this is a way of sharing, and I've also been in contact with the European Crime Prevention Organization, EU CPN, and I was speaking in Brussels a couple of months ago about the method.
Well, that's, I should say, very good news, and thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and your experience on the method. And I think many of those who listen to your talk will want to look deeper into it. Maybe you can give some information about further readings or stuff so that we can continue. Thank you, Suzanne, for that.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah, there is another question, Suzanne. I think you're still with us.
I'm here.
Yeah, and Annika wants to know at what point the RRI is adopted. As per the graphs, some cases have 20, 30 or 40 reports, others not so much. So does this matter how many reports already have been made?
I'm not sure I understand the question. We receive the cases through the victim protection process.
Yes.
And after that, we make a risk assessment. And after the risk assessment, we decide what tool, what measure fits in this particular case. And in some of the cases, RRE suits better than other tools. So how many reports there are made doesn't affect. It's the risk assessment that help us choose what measure that should be taken.
Yeah, thank you, Annika. I think this answers your question. Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, so no further questions. So yes, further reading would be very much appreciated. I can read in the chat bar. Thank you, Suzanne. Our next speaker is Kim Hirt from Norway. I met Kim a couple of years ago in Gimborn, where she gave an impressive talk about her work as, at the time, being a police superintendent. She was working with women and girls in rather secluded migration communities in Oslo. And since then, Kim has moved on, and she's now working within the rollout of a United Nations invitation to fight violence against women and girls. And her first mission took her to Ethiopia, and she will tell us more about it and give us an idea of what she experienced in working there in Ethiopia. And what I just find very interesting in your work, Kim, is that you always seem to look at the protection of women and girls from a very cultural, sensitive angle. And I think this is also one of the reasons why United Nations got you involved. And so we're very curious to hear about your experience in Ethiopia. The floor is yours. Kim, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Can you? I just put my camera on right now. Do you see me?
Yes, yes.
I can see you.
Okay, that's all. Okay, thank you so much, Ulrike, for the good introduction, and thanks for having me here on this conference, though. Like you said, though, I've been a police superintendent for 31 years in Oslo, and the last 13 years I developed a pioneer work with minority population, the female minority population in Oslo, because I saw that they didn't speak our language that well, and they needed help and support with the laws. And Norway is a country with equal rights, everything is equal. The laws are for everybody. So, and all violence is banned. So I started that work, knocking on all doors to the mosques. It was a painstaking work, but hard work pays off. So after a while, I was invited to all the mosques, all the NGOs and denominations that especially those who had segregation, those were the ones I was really looking at. I'm going to just tell one story, a success story. I have lots, but I'm going to tell one. I gave my lectures in different women's groups, and I was at this group. It was a course that our community had arranged for women to become better, to speak our language and help them to apply for jobs, to be part of the society. So I was there, there were 80 women and from different places in the world. And I told them, I mean, there are equal rights. Nobody can use force on you, and all abuse is banned in Norway. And I said, you have to have your own credit card. And all the time when I'm talking, the ladies are crying, some of them. And it isn't because I'm telling like sad stories. It's because I'm telling the truth. And the lady, she wanted to talk to me later. And she came with a teacher and she told me her story. She came to Norway when she was a little girl with her family. And she loved school and wanted to become a teacher. And her parents had arranged for her to get married. So when I met her, she had been in this really abusive marriage for 25 years. And she had 6 kids, and her husband was raping her like 3 times a day. And nobody has really detected how she was living, and the kids, they were suffering too. This is a long story. I'm going to make it short. Her husband, he was sent to jail. The lady and the kids, they needed to come to a safer place in Norway because the community and the people from her extended family just still picked on her. If you haven't told the police, your husband would not go to jail and stuff like that. And it was a loss of honor, lack of honor. And before she left, she told me that she always wanted to become a teacher. And she said, when I was talking to her, I have no more hope. No more hope at all. And I said, look at me. I can share my hope with both of us. I have enough. So I lend you my hope. You give it back when you have your own. I promise it will be better. She left. And before she left, she showed me that she had her own credit card. And we just kept on working. And she lived in another place in Norway. She called me 5 years later and she said, you know what, Kim? Do you remember me? I said, yes. She said, you know what? First, I want to give you the hope you lend me back because I have my own now, and now I am a teacher. And this was a success story. Her kids were educated, and it helps to walk that extra mile. But last year, I retired as a police superintendent after working for 31 years. I was asked by the UN Women, by those who made the handbook. And that is, just a second here, I have this paper. That is Senior Police Advisor and Executive Director Jane Townsley and Project Coordinator Mirko Fernandez. They created the UN Women Handbook for Gender Responding Policing for women and girls subject to violence. And they asked if I wanted to become part of that team. They have chosen the different countries in the world that this handbook needs to be rolled out. So I was so happy, and they have been supported me enormously. My first project was in Addis Ababa. So Karen, if you please can show the first slide. That was in March 1st this year. Yeah, you can look at those first pictures though. Ethiopia holds a population of 115 million people, and 43% is estimated to be under the age of 15 years. Grinding conflicts, war, drought, poverty, unemployment, and high crime rates are some of the challenges Ethiopia is facing. Millions of people have fled to the capital, Addis Ababa, so the city is at the moment very crowded. And Ethiopia is the only country in Africa that has not been colonized, and their official language is Amharic. So everything on the handbook project, everything I said had to be translated from English to Amharic. So a former police commander from Addis Ababa police force was chosen from the local UN Women office to work together with me on the rollout of the UN Women's Handbook. And he picked me up and he took me to different police sites, to the police headquarters and police universities. He was my translator in all the communications needed to be done, and he wanted to be addressed Dr. Commander. When everything needed to be translated, it took double as long time too, and I believe that a lot is unfortunately lost during translation. But we did our very best. I was given permission from the Minister of Foreign Affairs to work and implement the rollout of the handbook. Here are the headquarters. Dr. Commander took me to the police headquarters, as you can see, and I met with all the higher officials in charge that day after I landed. And I had to sell in the handbook project and ask for their permission to roll out the handbook at 2 different police sites to monitor and interview the police officers who worked with gender-based violence and get to know their routines and see how they welcome women and girls who had experienced gender-based violence. After 2 weeks of monitoring and interviewing the staff at the police sites, I had to write a gap analysis, and the findings had to be presented for the higher officials at my next visit, which was in June this year. And I explained for them that the handbook should be a complementary manner, a support of national guidelines and already existing handbooks. It should reinforce the true police leaders in charge of police stations or police units to create a greater involvement and collaborate in delivering of police services across all communities and the communities they served. And the service should always be gender sensitive, and it should empower and encourage the leaders to support their staff and frontliners in every case of report. The leaders should be good role models and have high standard. I believe that it was easier for the higher officials to accept my message because it came from a police to the police. I told stories about my own police work and the challenges I had experienced in Norway. The handbook is written by police to police and attends cases of violence against women and girls to be gender responsive. Luckily for me and the handbook project, I was accepted and got the permission to carry on with the handbook rollout at 2 chosen police sites and 2 police universities and colleges. I gathered all the police leaders, commanders in Addis Ababa to a whole day workshop. Take the next slide, please. Well, that was from my pioneer work, but one more. Oh, yeah, you can just stop at there. This is from Addis. And like I told you, they have a lot of poverty and things to struggle. But yeah, and the next is from the workshop. And at the workshop, also Her Excellency from the African Union, Letty Chiavara, participated. She was an awesome woman, and leaders from the local UN Women Office were all also present. The feedback from the workshop were positive, and everyone was ready for the next steps of the implementation of the handbook. Gender responsive policing means that the investigation focuses on the action of the alleged perpetrator and not on the victim and survivor's character, behavior or credibility. We have to shift our focus on the crime carried out and not on the victim and survivors. Violence against women and girls is one of the most serious and universal human rights violations. And country data shows that approximately 1/3 of women globally have reported experiencing physically and or sexual violence at some point in their lifetime, mainly by partners or close family members, as we have heard earlier in this conference. Same study also shows that high rates of underreporting, almost 66% by women and girls, who has experienced violence. So we have to encourage the women, and somebody has to believe in them. This is what we are trying. The handbook is trying to teach the higher officials, so they should be good role models and teach their subordinates. And we also know that violence against women and girls also has numerous short and long-term impact for survivors' physical and mental health, well-being and safety. Research has established that women and girls experiencing violence utilize health services more frequently and are more likely to report a worse health status and quality of life than those who do not experience violence. And violence against women and girls has also ripple effects for families, communities, wider society, and for the economy. For example, lost employment and productivity, work and school, impede long-term economic growth. If unaddressed, violence against women and girls has serious cost implications and consequences for poverty reduction and development, including hampering the efforts to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Many women are forced to stay in violent and unhealthy relationships because if their husbands are arrested, they do not have an income and are not able to support themselves. Often her in-laws will not take care of her and her children due to anger and shame because she reported on her husband and he was sent to prison. So many women are forced to stay in violent relationships. This has ripple effects on the children growing up with violence, seeing their mothers being beaten up and often being exposed to violence themselves too. The community suffers and the health expenses are enormous. The poverty will not change, lack of school education and not being able to work. The children might carry on the toxic behavior to further generations. The cycle must end. And if we intervene now, I told the police leaders, less children will see violence and get a better future. And I used the example for them. Everybody here in this room, you have had a mother or still have, or probably a wife and a daughter and a sister. You know, do you want the future to be like this for the female in Ethiopia? Like 50% of the population in Ethiopia and in the world actually are female. We have to really stop that and make a good environment for everybody. And the aim of the handbook is twofold: is to provide practical guidance to police to enable an effective and gender-sensitive response to violence against women and girls by sharing learning that promotes a culture of reflection and learning and leading to institutional transformation, and to promote the police service that seeks to balance effectiveness with accountability in their response to violence against women and girls through reviewing, evaluating and monitoring investigation tools, strategies, policies and approaches with the support of external actors in civil societies, women's and survivors' organization and academia. And the handbook seems to inspire behavioral change towards preventing, orientating policing that is gender responsive and trauma informed and perpetrator focused. And by primarily targeting police middle managers, the handbook will aim to reach a cohort of role models that will inspire change from subordinates, relying on recent studies on what works from model of behavioral change science. And I believe that, and I also learned from my teachers, Jane and Mirko, that behavior predicts attitudes and attitudes do not predict behavior. We must focus on the expected behavior and not on the existing behavior. As the expected behavior becomes normalized, the desired changes in attitudes will follow. During my first day in Ethiopia in March, we visited a shelter, a safe house for raped and abused children, from toddlers to teenagers. That was just devastating to just watch it. So I was crying behind my sunglasses like all the time. Here I saw pregnant kids, 10 years old, or just had delivered babies. And there was a close relative who has been performing this. And the kids got help there at the shelter and they learned different skills and they had some schooling there. But what I heard was that when they were a teen, they should take care of themselves and the baby. And I was like, how can this be? You know, if they go back out on the street, you know, the story will repeat itself. And I saw lots of children, as you can see on the picture a little above, working on the streets, either selling different items, begging, or being involved in crime, often with a baby on their back, instead of going back to school. I came back to Addis Ababa in June this year for the second part of the rollout of the handbook. The leader of the UN Women Country Office in Addis Ababa arranged a training of the training conference for all the participants, the police commanders and higher officials, in a hotel outside Addis Ababa. And there were some really intensive days and the participants were eager and dedicated. I picked out relevant chapters from the 14 chapters in the handbook that related to the findings in my gap analysis from the 2 police sites from my first visit in March. And after each lecture, I arranged group works and group presentations from the participants. So they had to present, what they thought were solutions and how they could change things for their police force in their own country. And I was trying to explain for them so they could understand what was in the heart of an effective response to violence against women and girls. And that the handbook wanted to strengthen the police in the good work they're already doing by adding new methods, guidelines and ideas. What needs to be improved? I said, let us work on that. Tell me where it hurts so I can help you. Can you identify any gaps in your police work? Let us work with that. And we just wanted to make their system and tools stronger and more gender sensitive so they could have more impact. And the tools are no better than the user of the tools. And what lessons were learned, and to know how to de-escalate and building partnership, and to focus on the behavior of the perpetrator and the safety for victims, and more evidence-based understanding. And I said, let us add value and support and no more hurtful and negative bias for women. Let us respond to women and girls. They have the same value as men and boys. And we had to shift our focus on the crime carried out and not on the victim survivors. And like I said, we are all human beings. There is more that connects us than divides us. And every time a woman speaks up about her experiences of violence and she is not believed, the cycle of abuse continues. Every time you hear a survivor's story, listen, believe, and support. As a police officer, you are sent to help people, not judge. Start believing the victims and survivors. And acts of violence against women and girls are particularly prone to police gender bias, which can undermine team efforts to effectively respond to it. And a commitment to a victim-centered approach will generate more trust and collaboration with victims and support of violence against women and girls. And gender-based violence cuts across all generations, nationalities, and all communities in all its forms. It devastates lives and societies around the globe. In the tea break and in the afternoon, I got very personal and good conversations with the police leaders and especially the females. I gave them my mail address and we are keeping in contact. During my stay, I was told about incidents that in the police force where male leaders used their rank and power to obtain sex and used it as a weapon for the females to not rise in rank if they didn't do what the men wanted, if they had applied for a position. So, yeah, it's very devastating. And I was so happy that I could really talk to these people, to make them good role models so this won't happen again. And during the conference too, I explained that I was not in Ethiopia to change the already good existing work, but to implement valuable mechanisms and guidelines and to pivot police leadership towards a greater civic engagement, partnership and community consultation. And it's so important to create good relationships between the communities and the local police. And we also talked about the coronavirus and how it has greatly exacerbated in the whole world, as many women and girls have been locked down, locked up in their houses for 6 months, and the domestic violence has intensified in what has been described as a shadow pandemic, and that actually is for the whole world. In Norway, we saw a lot of that too when we're starting to open up again, and then people called the police. They told about what they have experienced. So this is, I think, for the whole world. So we were also having that as a chapter at the training of the trainers about what do we do next time something happens. Are we prepared for that? So that is very important. I feel that I'm a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion in policing and society as well. And as a former police superintendent, my goal for our generation is to create an environment with a police force that is reliable, accountable, educated and gender sensitive to all police, no matter gender, race, politics, or religion. We have to walk that extra mile with people, become a dream releaser and a hope giver, a hope lender. And each person define who we are, and we shouldn't listen to negative people. Everyone has a story, and everyone has been through something that has changed them. So we should never judge the person by the chapters we just walked into. And we have to speak up every time somebody crosses the line, anywhere, everywhere. And let us not allow silence to be compliance to a culture of violence. So I think we can do a little bit difference by just being the voice that helps people, and especially women and girls. And women belong in all places where decisions are made. And like I told the leaders, a true leader doesn't create separation. A true leader brings people together. And only by working together, we can end violence against women and girls. And everybody should be afforded the opportunity to dream and become everything their imagination desire. Thank you.
Kim, thank you very much for that. I think I'm not the only one who is impressed. And just allow me to say some really personal words. I think you're a real ambassador for promoting human rights, and especially here for the human rights of females, women and girls. And what impresses me, and that impressed me when you have been over to Gimborn, is your cultural awareness and your cultural sensitivity. If you could lend me only 20% of that, I would be really very, very grateful. And I think, you focused on working with minorities in Oslo when you did your work there. And now you're just going into countries where this cultural awareness is definitely needed when we work on human rights for girls. So honestly, I'm really, really very, very impressed. Thank you for that. And I just want to, read what Mybrit wrote in the chat bar. Where is it now? An enormous work to change the view of women and girls. I'm sure it can take generations, but Kim, we start now our mission to change. And I think you really started to change. Eva says, Kim, your passion comes across through the screen. Very strong, amazing work, great presentations. I know a few visits, a few trainings don't make a change, but I think you do leave your footprint over there, and you do encourage the women, the police women in the forces in Ethiopia, and I think you're really a role model for them. So, copy of the handbook. Yeah, we're going to put that in the chat bar. The name of the handbook. Can you provide that for the participants? And I just can see that everybody's very, very impressed. And I do know from what you've done in Oslo that this can be also done in other European countries where we have to deal with victimized females in secluded migration communities. So thank you very much, Kim, for that. Oh, it is in. Karen put it in. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you again, hopefully, Kim.
Yeah.
And
bye.
Good luck with your work in the future.
Thank you. I'm going to Ghana next time.
Wow. Keep us posted, please.
October.
We want to know about your experience, and you're going to write a book about it.
I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we are now leaving the African continent and moving on to Australia, to Down Under. And we're going to welcome Jeanette Kerr, who is our next speaker. Jeanette, hello. We can see you. You're looking up. Still muted. Hello. Yeah. Jeanette, you focus on intimate partner violence in first-generation communities in Australia, I understand. And you wrote your master thesis at Cambridge University where you analyzed characteristics of intimate partner violence in the Northern Territory of Australia. So, and you developed a strategy to target high harm cases. You've been a police officer for 20 odd years, I understood, and you are now working in the field of decreasing partner violence on a more strategic level, as I understand, in the north of Australia. So we're very much looking forward to your presentation. Floor is yours. And I'm going to mute myself. Thank you.
Very much. So I just want to check, does everyone see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, Jeanette, that's fine.
Okay, it's a big orange one because I can't see it here.
It's a big orange one.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all here this evening, or this morning there, this evening here. It's a really great opportunity, and I'm really passionate about sharing the unique situation of Aboriginal women in Australia in domestic violence. People think of, I think generally of Australia as this golden country that's very, very wealthy and, you know, beautiful beaches, etc. But you'll see in this picture, also very, very beautiful. But this is what the centre of Australia looks like. It's desert country, and it's really sparse. And the people that live in this country, Aboriginal people that live in the remote communities, the conditions are probably more like remote Ethiopia, to be honest, than they are what you'd expect in Anglo or Western country. So this research looked at a descriptive analysis of police cases, and I'll see if that moves. Has your slide moved?
Yes, it has. We're looking at Northern Territory map.
Yay. So you can see that's Australia, and the one that says Northern Territory is the jurisdiction that I'm from. That's 1.4 million square kilometres. And in that, which I think in square miles for those that are still in Imperial, it's about 900,000 square miles. And it has a population of only 240,000 people. So very, very sparse and remote, except for in Darwin. And you'll see here on this map, this is the area where I'm working at the moment, but across this entire area, it's made up of a lot of very small, remote, very remote communities. In addition to it being very remote in terms of travel, you can't get into many of these communities for half of the year. So, for example, in this northern part of Australia here, we only have 2 seasons, dry and wet. And when it's wet, you can't travel because all the rivers are up. So that gives some really unique context to the situation for First Nations people or Aboriginal people here, and women in particular. So poverty, disadvantage, isolation, remoteness, and other factors, socio-cultural factors, really exacerbate their vulnerability. So this research, I got a 5-year data set of domestic and family violence cases from the Northern Territory Police, 88,000 unique cases. And then when that was, we then broke that down and identified of the 88,000, 62,000 or 70% were cases of intimate partner violence. And then we focused this research on intimate partner violence only. And that 62,000 cases was made up of 23,000 unique couples. So that's 46,000 people thereabouts. Or some were in multiple couples, but well over 44,000, I think, unique people. When you actually have a look at the population of 240,000 and you take children out, this is 40-odd thousand people out of 180,000 population, and 90% of those people are Aboriginal. So the population of Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory is 32%, which makes up 30% of the entire Australian Aboriginal population. and the average of Aboriginal population of Australia is 2.5%. So you can see in the remote Northern Territory that's a very, very high proportion of Aboriginal people in our population. What's also really interesting about the Aboriginal communities in Australia is they're not one culture like, say, the Maori are in New Zealand. There's about 350 cultural groups, and there has been unique languages to go with many of those groups. So it's not unusual in the Northern Territory for Aboriginal people to speak 3, 4 or 5 languages before they speak English. So what we discovered in this is that you talked about the International Violence Against Women survey. In Australia, the Personal Safety Survey is a subset of that, and it determines that roughly the same as other Western countries, 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women experience personal violence in their lifetime post 16 or 15. What I discovered in this research, which was really, really alarming, is that the Personal Violence Survey does not survey any remote communities. So for the Northern Territory, we actually have no idea what the situation was until this research. And in fact, it doesn't even survey on town camps in Alice Springs and Darwin, the bigger towns and cities. And a town camp, I think I would best describe as like a mission settlement you might see in other places where Aboriginal people have come together on the fringes of cities. So we actually had no idea. What we've managed to extrapolate from this research, which has been particularly valuable, is that of the Aboriginal population, 75% of women, as a minimum, Aboriginal women in the Northern Territories are the victims of domestic violence. That's 3 out of every 4. It is amongst the highest rates of intimate partner violence in the world, and which is shameful, absolutely shameful, particularly for a country like Australia that is a wealthy country. But in addition to that, Aboriginal women in the Northern Territory are 40 times more likely to be hospitalised as a result of an assault or violence from their intimate partner than any other woman in Australia. So this was a much higher than expected rate of offending. And then it also went on to say it also found that 2/3 of the incidents were what were categorised as low harm or non-crime versus criminal. And there was also very strong arguments for gender symmetry in violence in at least the low harm cases, which is something that's been really unpopular in some of the feminist theory and research over time. But if a deep understanding of the cultural context, it really does make sense. So in Australia, and particularly in the Northern Territory Police, there's always been a view that domestic violence always escalates, always gets serious, and always gets more dangerous over time. But in fact, even in a population as highly vulnerable and victimised as the population here, that wasn't the case. In almost 1/2 of the couples, there was only 1 incidence or appearance in the data set over time. And so that indicated it's not actually true, even for the Northern Territory, that intimate partner violence always escalates. And I think that's important in determining how we do police responses. So, for example, I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but in Australia, there's basically a standard response to all domestic violence incidents. So whether or not it's low harm or high harm, so there's a minimum standard. What it might mean is that when you have a rate of, 20-odd thousand domestic violence disturbances a year, a lot of police resources and therefore fatigue around responding can be lost in the absence of having a risk assessment mechanism that allows you to focus where the most harm and the most danger is, or the most risk. However, when a couple had 2 or more incidents in the 4-year period, there was a very, very strong pattern of escalation. And that wasn't just in frequency, how many times, up to 20 incidents, but also in seriousness, as in the harm caused, and also in intermittency reduced over that period. So initially, say between incident 1 and 2, there was an average of 9 months between incidents. Between 2 and 3, it changed to, came down to 7 months, then 5 months. And when we get to incident 20, it's about every 5 weeks was the average offending time. And in the data set, as you can imagine, with highly vulnerable, impoverished and disadvantaged communities, alcohol is a huge issue in the Northern Territory, which has 1.5 times the consumption of Australia of alcohol, which you probably know is already quite high. And what it determined was that reducing alcohol doesn't reduce the rate of intimate partner violence, but it does reduce harm. So when I talk about crime harm, and what it basically means, it's a methodology that came from Sherman and others at Cambridge University Institute of Criminology. And rather than counting incidents by incident numbers, which many jurisdictions do, and I know Maybrit's done the Swedish Crime Harm Index, so say there's 5 domestic disturbances as counted as 5, and they might be verbal arguments versus 1 homicide or serious assault. They're not the same. So when you only count in numbers or incident counts, it distorts the seriousness of the crime. So this crime harm index methodology uses the sentencing guidelines. We use the ones from the UK. England and Wales, we matched the offences here to the offences from England and Wales and used their crime harm value, which is number of days in prison that the relevant crime would attach. And it gives you a much greater clarity for an evidence base to deploy resources in policing and to develop policy. So in the research, what you're seeing here is that 1/3 were crime incidents and 2/3 were non-crime. Difference being a crime refers to an incident where there's on face value evidence of crimes being committed, there's an identified victim, identified offender. Non-crimes are where there's been a disturbance, there's participants, but a prima facie case for a crime hasn't been determined. There was similar research in the UK that found the same sort of breakdown. And in that research, just like this research, we expect that in quite a number of cases, police, what we would call it here, write off domestic violence as domestic incidents. So I'm sure that's probably something that happens in your countries as well. Another really interesting piece of evidence that came out of this, which is really informative for policy and response in domestic violence, is that breaches of domestic violence orders, so they're orders that restrain either contact or behaviour or drinking between intimate partners, breaches occurred in almost half of the incidents in DV crime. So, and at least 60% of intimate partner violence occurred where a domestic violence order was already present. Why is this? This is important because it shows that at least here in the Northern Territory, that domestic violence orders are probably not a particularly effective mechanism for reducing harm or the risk of violence against women. It also alarmingly showed here that the violence starts at a very young age and it rises very, very, very steeply. So this is category of contact, starting at 10 to 14 years, sharp incline to 18 years and a very, very sharp incline to 19, 20 years. From there it tapers off, but it shows that the evidence that came out of this is that when there's incidents involving young people, domestic violence or coercive control incidents, they're the incidents that police and other agencies should intervene very quickly and very intensively with both the victim and the offender, or the male and the female. And And I'll say in this data, we took out same-sex couples because we wanted to be very focused on what we're looking at, although that was a very small percentage. So it's in these places in the early years where you have the greatest opportunity to reduce prevalence and harm associated with crime. I think looking at the time, I will skip over this. It's basically says in the majority of cases there's no, no, I'll just skip that one. This one's really more interesting. So this is the percent of total incidents. So 69 odd incidents do not have a weapon, and that counts for 54% of all harm, as if you look at harm as a total percentage. Not unexpected. And then where you have a weapon, the harm is much higher. But down here, if you have a look at edged weapons account for only 6.5% of all incidents, but 21% of the harm. So that there gives us police, and if you add glass as an edged weapon as well, that gives police real opportunities to be targeting education, awareness, and responses where there's been violence involving edged weapons. That should be something that gets triaged in a risk assessment much, much higher than anything else, as well as young age and alcohol use. In this one, we often hear that the reason that that women who are the victims of domestic violence, you'll hear the narrative often, or at least hear, oh yeah, they pick the same sort of men, they go from relationship to relationship, and it's almost a victim blaming thing that they just can't help but pick men who are going to be violent to them. What was really fascinating is we decided to have a look at that, and in 92%, if you add 1 or 2 relationships, 92% of men and women only had 1 or 2 relationships. So it's not in fact a case that people circulate, particularly Aboriginal people, through relationships. They tend to stay in the same relationship. And that, if you connect that with domestic violence orders being perpetrated in 50 to 60% of the cases, you can see that domestic violence orders and expecting women to leave relationships or people to separate is not likely to be effective at all. If you come here and we look here, the really important piece of information here is that non-Aboriginal men, about 50% of the time, breach an order, domestic violence order against a partner or an ex-partner. There's no real higher risk either way. So that's important in risk assessment. Aboriginal men, however, 80% offend against a current partner. And that's for another number of reasons. One is the remoteness. One is the very deep cultural connection to country. People here are part of the country, and it's a very, very deep cultural connection. The land and the songlines and the language that goes with country means that people do not move away from country very often. And if they do, there's kinship system is so strong that it's very hard to move away. So again, for agencies, this shows that you cannot do a standard, stock standard Western response to domestic violence in Aboriginal communities in the Northern Territory and likely other places. We then looked at women's offending, again, looking at the time. I actually might skip this one. And looking at geographic location, that's also really important things in terms of deploying police resources. So, for example, you'll see second from the bottom is a place called Tennant Creek. And in Tennant Creek, it's a very, very small total population. And it's only 1.5% of the entire Northern Territory population, but they have 1,269 domestic violence incidents for every 1,000 people in the population. So extreme, very extreme, like more than one per person in this 5-year population set. Then you go up to somewhere like Alice Springs. Okay, it's the third highest at 450 per 1,000. But the real temptation here, looking at this, is that you put a much higher focus on resources in Tennant Creek. And yes, you should. But when you look at it associated with crime harm, in Tennant Creek, they have 7.5% of the incidents, but the proportionate crime harm is much lower at 6.2. Yes, there's a lot of incidents, but the harm level, the violence, the aggravations, the injuries are not associated with it at a commensurate level. Then if you go to somewhere like Alice Springs at the top, 23% of total incidents almost, and 33.4% of the total crime harm, which means that the harm caused in Alice Springs is 50% higher than the actual number of incidents. So in fact, this is an area where more police resources should be focused proportionately than others. Again, this is looking at intoxication. So orange is where only the purple, right, a little skinny bit at the top, is when there's an incident and only the victim is intoxicated, very rare. Green is where they're both intoxicated, victim offender, and red is where only the offender is intoxicated. So you can see the impact on alcohol. So for example, in Alice Springs, 90% of violence incidents, intimate partner violence incidents, and likewise in Tennant Creek and Katherine, is 90% of the people involved, victim and offender, or there's alcohol involved in 90% of the cases. And that is what contributes to the very, very high rates of offending and the harm associated. In the interest of time, I might skip over this, but basically it'll say that where alcohol's involved, you're much more likely to have a crime and you're much more likely to have injury. This looks at the 4-year window. So from the first time a couple appears in the data set, we went from first appearance to 4 years later, so that we could have a look at probability of reoccurrence of victimisation over time, which is actually really quite low in a lot of Caucasian, European, Australian, American jurisdictions or countries. But in the Northern Territory, it was just a total flip, basically. In 1 year, it's a 53% likelihood of reoccurrence, and it goes up from that to the next one over time. By the time you get to year 3, if you've been a victim in year 3, you've got a 98% probability of being a victim in year 4. So that was kind of alarming. However, on the positive side, it did show that over time there is desistance even between couples, unique couples. And so again, the really important issue is that when you get 2, 3 or more incidents, that's when you should be focusing much higher resources in our police response. I've already talked about the days in between. Here you'll see a graph that shows the very rapid increase in escalation in harm or severity over the up to 20. And this is the first time in using this methodology that this level of escalation has been found. In most places, there has been not an escalation at all. So some of the recommendations that we could draw out of doing a quantitative piece of work like this is that we talked about how critical it was for young people to have intensive and immediate early interventions when they're involved in a domestic intimate partner violence relationship, and how very, very important it is to develop education programs, not only in schools, but in the wider community, so that we can, and it's not just respectful relationships, it's far more serious than that here in terms of the level of violence. In terms of alternative justice, it's really quite clear that if 80% of the offending against Aboriginal women is by their current partner, and there's a DVO in place in 60% of those cases, that standard Western type responses to intimate partner violence are not going to be effective, especially when people are very community involved, live on community and strong kinship systems. We have to look at more communitarian responses to dealing with domestic violence. And then looking at legislation that, one, we can assure victim safety, but give the couple a choice to remain together rather than the system trying to force them apart. Focused deterrence. So for those small number of offenders who, you know, beyond 2-3 offences, continue to offend, we know then that they are very, very high risk offenders. And that's when we need to have targeting and monitoring of recidivist offenders, because those are the ones that are more likely to cause very, very serious harm and homicide. So, for example, in the Northern Territory where I am, there's been 5 family violence homicides in the last 12 months. And this is in a population of 30,000 people. It's excessive and really very violent homicides as well. I've talked about a risk harm matrix and the things that need to be built in. That's been progressed in the Northern Territory. And obviously alcohol. Alcohol doesn't cause domestic violence. Alcohol doesn't increase the number of incidents in domestic violence, because we have a number of dry communities where there's no access to alcohol. It still had reasonably high rates of domestic violence or incidents. But what it does do is increase the harms associated and make it far more likely for serious injury. So obviously reducing the number of alcohol outlets and licences for the Territory, which has very many, is a really, really important measure to restrict the supply of alcohol in some locations. I'm not going to talk about further research, except to say that in many places, family violence is grouped as a homogenous thing, and I think it's really important in context. Many contexts, that intimate partner violence is separated from wider family violence, not because one is more serious or more high risk than the other, but just so that we can have the research and the data to identify more bespoke evidence-based methodology to intervene. So look, there's my email on the bottom if anyone's got any other questions or wants to touch base. And also there's a paper that we've published in the Cambridge Journal of Evidence-Based Policing, if anyone wants more than the whirlwind 20 minutes. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Annette. I have 2 questions for you from the chat bar. Sangeeta wants to know whether you did a simultaneous comparable study of white Australians, or are Aboriginal abusers different to white abusers?
Yes, we did. There was white Australians or non-Aboriginal Australians in the data set. It was when we got down to the actual crimes, it was, it was about 10% were white Australian. And so in those cases, less than 2% showed any level of escalation in frequency, seriousness or intermittency, but as compared to 35% for Aboriginal populations. But this is just the Northern Territory. It's not the same as the rest of Australia necessarily.
I would like to add a question. Do you know how high the percentage of police officers is in Australia with an Aboriginal background? And does this make a difference to, when police is responding to partner violence, domestic violence?
So, for example, in the Northern Territory, there's 1,600 police for a population of 240,000. I think it's one police for about 300 or 400 people, which is very quite high. I think might even be, it's obvious, no, it's probably much higher, must be 200-ish. Anyway, so about 10 to 12% of that group are Aboriginal police and Aboriginal liaison officers. I think, yes, definitely the cultural understanding makes them far better police officers and far better child protection workers and youth justice officers, but it doesn't always make a difference because there's high levels of violence across our cohort.
I think that Sangeeta's further question refers also to this context, because she asked, did you take into account how the police respond unequally to Aboriginal men than white men?
I think that it would be fair to say that because the prevalence is so very, very high in the Northern Territory of Aboriginal intimate partner violence in comparison, I think it would be, and this is just anecdotal and intuitive, I think it would be, if it was a white woman and a white offender, which is, 99.9% of the cases, the race is homogenous, that would be taken more seriously than if it's an Aboriginal woman victim.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, wrongly. I think there's a high level of compassion fatigue.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Annette, for that. It was very, very interesting. And so, I mean, just to, and Annika saying statistically how many male victims reports you experience on all backgrounds. Further question. Could you answer that?
Yeah, I can. I actually pulled that slide out because I had too many. About 85% of victims are Aboriginal women, about 10 to 12% are Aboriginal men, virtually no non-Aboriginal men, and 3 or 4% Aboriginal women. Interestingly, though, the group that suffers the highest level of harm at this point was Aboriginal men in terms of stabbings, but that has changed obviously recently because we did take the homicides out of that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Sangeeta added that, the unequal response of the police to violence happens in the UK and in the United States and in the rest of Europe. And I think this is something that is, that we see in many places, that members of minority communities experience a different approach. And I think I do agree, Sangeeta, that this is something the police and researchers really should look into, and there should be done much more training about it. Yeah. So this is an interesting subject, which probably will, find its way into the evaluation of the overall workshop. Jeanette, thank you very much. It's evening in Australia, I understood, so the end of your work day. And we're coming to the end of the first part of the workshop. We heard from 3 continents today. I mean, moved from Europe to Africa, from Africa to Australia. And the very different political, socio-economic, cultural circumstances in the countries we heard from ask, as we just found out in the last minutes, ask really for tailored approaches to fight the violence. And I very much look forward to see you back on Wednesday when we move on and move to Indonesia and to other parts of the world and just learn more about how they do fight violence against girls and women and what approaches they take. Thank you very much for being with us today, and I really look forward to seeing you again on Wednesday, 9 o'clock UK, 10 o'clock Central European Time. Bye. Mybrit, are you going to say something? Farewell? No? Okay. Bye-bye all. Thank you very much.